Hey everyone, today we're diving into two ancient prophets, Amos and Obadiah. And let me tell you, their message about justice feels like it could have been written this morning. It's incredibly relevant.
So let's just start with this pretty provocative statement, right? The idea that more harm has been done in the name of religion than for any other reason, more than for money or power or anything else. This really sets the stage for the core problem we're going to unpack.
So what makes it so uniquely dangerous? Well, think about it. When any cause, any movement gets that stamp of divine approval, it can be used to justify some of the worst things imaginable. It becomes this incredibly potent and sometimes terrible force.
And this is the absolute heart of the issue. The second people truly believe that God is not just on their side, but is actually ordering their actions, all the normal moral guardrails can just vanish. History is absolutely littered with examples of this, and they're staggering.
Which, of course, brings up a massive question. If this religious energy can be so powerful and so easily corrupted, what's the safety valve? What's supposed to stop it from just going completely off the rails?
Well, the answer, and this might surprise you, is found in figures like the biblical prophets. You can think of them as these essential watchdogs, the internal critics whose entire job is to keep religion honest and to keep it compassionate.
A real prophet, in this sense, isn't someone who's just predicting the future. No, they're the ones who couldn't care less about your power, your title, or your public image. Their job is to cut through all the noise, call out hypocrisy, and stand up for justice, especially when that injustice is trying to wrap itself in a religious flag.
Okay, so let's meet our first example, a guy named Amos. This man was a giant, a fierce defender of the poor and a relentless critic of the powerful who were using their faith as a cover story.
Amos had a very clear hit list. He went right after the wealthy who were crushing the poor. He called out leaders who used God's name to make their own greed sound holy. And he had zero patience for anyone whose religious life was just a show. All these fancy rituals that were just a mask for a life that had no real justice or compassion in it. And here's why this is so important. Without that constant, nagging, internal critique, a spiritual life can become totally self-serving. It can actually end up making us worse people, pushing us further away from the very good we claim to be seeking.
Okay, so that brings us to our second prophet, Obadiah. And his story is set against the backdrop of one of the oldest family feuds in history, a rivalry so deep it literally shaped nations.
So the whole thing goes way back to twin brothers, Jacob and Esau. Jacob, he's the ancestor of the nation of Israel. Esau is the ancestor of a neighboring nation, Edom. And that sibling rivalry just never went away. It simmered for centuries. So when Israel was eventually conquered and dragged into exile, their cousins, the Edomites, didn't lift a finger to help. Nope, they just stood by and celebrated their downfall.
So when the prophet Obadiah shows up and delivers this fiery judgment against Edom, it seems like a pretty open and shut case, right? Edom's the bad guy, Israel's the victim, and now it's payback time. A simple, straightforward story of revenge.
But, and this is where it gets really interesting, the story doesn't just end there. The prophecy takes this incredible turn, moving way beyond simple get-back-at-you revenge.
So you have to ask yourself, is that really the point of the story? Just getting even? Is this cycle of hate and violence just supposed to go on forever and ever? Well, the text itself pushes us to look a little deeper.
And here it is, the twist. The prophecy doesn't end with Israel getting their revenge on their old enemies. Instead, it ends with them taking on the responsibility of government. They aren't supposed to do to Edom what Edom did to them. No, they're called to something much higher, to rule with real, true justice.
It all comes down to this. One single final verse. It's the very last word of the whole book, and it completely flips the script, pointing toward a totally different kind of future. And that pivot is everything. The story transforms from this ancient, bitter grudge match into a new mission. It's all about breaking the cycle. It's the difference between just settling a score and actually taking on the hard work of building a just world. So, what do we do with all this? What can we possibly pull from these two ancient voices that speaks to us today? Let's try and boil the lessons from Amos and Obadiah down to their essence.
It really leaves us with two powerful challenges. First, from Amos, we get the courage to question injustice wherever we see it, especially when it's dressed up in pious language. And second, From Obadiah, we get the wisdom to break the cycle of violence by choosing the hard path of justice over the easy path of revenge.
And that leaves us with one final, and I think vital question for our own time. In our own lives, in our own communities, in a world that is just full of conflict and old wounds, what does it actually look like for us to break that cycle? How do we choose the difficult, necessary work of justice over the simple, satisfying feeling of revenge?